Hello and welcome to the January 18th weekly JupyterLab call. Let's see, today we have 22 people on the call. And if you just joined, please find the agenda in the chat. And let's see, we have some stuff in the agenda already, but doesn't look like a full hour's worth. So if there's something you'd like to talk about, please add an agenda item and let's talk about it. But for now, why don't we get started? The first person on the agenda today is Fred.
Hello, everybody. So it's more updates than really discussion point. Just a reminder, we're gonna have the first 2023 performance meeting after this one. So maybe in an hour if we get this one early. On the two next release of JupyterLab, so 3.6, we have the release candidate that's out since a week. This week there's been quite lots of CI failures that needed to be fixed. I think I have addressed all of them. And so for the final release, there are only two PR that are missing. If somebody is thinking of something else, like add some bullet points on that list, but otherwise I got the release of the final version as soon as those two are in. And on the 4.0 plan, there is nothing very new. I made the release of Lumino 2 Beta 0. Before releasing the release candidate, there are still the features of Mike of introducing some shadow DOM capability in the widget. That has to be discussed, and he has opened a PR, and there is the link. And I don't know if he's here. Yeah, he's here. So I don't know if he wants to say more about it. But other than, I think if people are interested, they can just go to the issue and the PR to know more about it. And that's all for me for the status.
Regarding the shadow DOM, could it go into Lumino 2.1 potentially? So I know that we are debating whether that's actually a good solution, but looking at the API surface, does it look like something that could be included in 2.1, or does it have to go into 2.0?
I'm sorry, Mike, I get trouble to get your sound. Sorry, thanks.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I also was a little bit like, I think I can, oh, no. Okay, cool. Any other questions, comments, reactions to Fred?
No, it's good on my side. Sorry.
Cool. Okay. We have a group entry here. I don't know which of the four of you would like to talk about this, but I will allow you to just jump in.
All right. I can take over for the presentation here. So our team just submitted a proposal to add this new project under the JupyterLab org. And basically the project is Jupyter Generative AI. The proposal and the vote link are both in there. And I also want to give a brief 5-minute screen sharing live demo, if that's all right with everyone.
Sounds great.
All right, let me just start sharing my screen. Let's see. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
I see
Awesome.
JupyterLab. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think a great question to start off with is what the heck is Jupyter Generative AI, right? And what this is a project our team has been working on pretty intensively for, I'd say, about the last month. And it's essentially, as you might have expected, this work was sort of spurred into action by the release of ChatGPT, and we were all completely blown away by its functionality. And we wanted a way of using these new generative AI models within JupyterLab as a sort of essentially a helper to a developer using JupyterLab, right? Like having it integrated as part of the development toolkit that we can use. So Jupyter GAI is essentially a framework for integrating generative AI models into JupyterLab, right? So it's essentially users will be able to install these what we call GAI modules that basically allow users to use generative AI models, right? So for example, one of the modules that we ship with by default is GPT-3, which is a large language model provided by OpenAI, and they actually do have a convenient Python SDK and corresponding HTTP API that can be used. And basically, the main usage flow right now looks like this. So a user can select a range of text, and right now this is just the entire contents of the cell, right? But you could imagine that in the future, you could select a sub range of a cell and generate output from that. And then once the cell's contents are selected, a user can right click and then click on this option in the context menu, generate output from selection with GAI. And a user is then presented a list of tasks. These tasks are basically an abstraction that basically it's a very vague definition because tasks can be very vague, right? Like basically they just perform tasks for you. So in this example, we're going to be looking at the explain code task. And essentially what the Jupyter GAI backend does is each task has a corresponding prompt template, right? And the prompt template basically fills in your selected range into this body variable and curly braces here. So it's really quite simple, really. And it can also, there are also other options that control how the output is inserted back into the, how the output is inserted back into the notebook, right? So here, the task will insert the output immediately above the selected text, right? So if we run this job, or this task rather, in a fairly long comment, it will explain exactly what this code does, which, as you might know, it just simply prints the integers from 1 to 5. And while that might not be particularly impressive, if we were to extend these results to some much more complicated code, such as this one below, the value of Jupyter GAI becomes much more apparent. Here we are going to generate output in a new cell above the current one, just so it's much easier to read. And this is, yes. So here, GPT-3 correctly recognizes this block of code as a convolutional neural network defined with PyTorch, which is really, really useful, as you might imagine. In the future, we could even add utilities to automatically annotate entire notebooks at a time, meaning that every single code cell gets a corresponding explanation. This is pretty useful for people who actually use notebooks in production and need support debugging or fixing issues. And the applications of GPT-3 are not limited to code explanation. It can even write its own code. So here we have some prompts to play around with, and here we can tell GPT-3 to generate Python 3 code. And when we run this task, we will see that GPT-3 does indeed correctly provide us an algorithm that calculates pi. Actually, I don't know if this will even run. It's not as GPT-3 is not as good as ChatGPT, which unfortunately doesn't have an API as of yet. Oh wow! Holy crap! It actually worked. Yeah, actually, not very accurate. I mean, it's 3.13 instead of 3.14, but you know, it's still very interesting. And what's much more impressive is that its capability can actually be pushed pretty far. Here we have a much more complex problem. I don't know how many of you all do leak code. I'm not sure, but this is a much more difficult question, and actually, it seems to also work. Sometimes the output does get truncated though, unfortunately, when there's not enough tokens to provide the full output. That's kind of a implementation error on our end. And right now, so this is the GPT-3 GAI module that's provided by default, that's providing all this. But I also wanted to demonstrate how exactly Jupyter GAI is modular. And essentially, a GAI module is just a Python package, right? It's just like a server extension. It's not really a server extension, but the installation process is very similar. You just do pip install and it essentially just magically works, right? So here I have my terminal. Can you all see the terminal, by the way?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So here, so
David,
normally,
you might want to bump up the font size a little bit for the sake of the recording.
I don't know what the keyboard shortcut is. It's not
usually
Control+.
Command Shift.
Oh, here we go. Command Shift. There, I had to. All right. So normally a user would just do Jupyter GAI, and then usually the GAI modules don't really have to follow any format. I mean, technically they can be any name, but we would prefer to adopt a convention of Jupyter GAI underscore and then the module name, right? So for example, if we were to want to use a GAI module named Dolly, which is the image generation model provided by OpenAI, then a user would just type this. Obviously, this isn't published yet to the PyPy registry, so right now we're just going to install our local version right here. Come on. Here we go, right? And then we restart the server. We restart the server, and do I have to? Yes, I don't even have to restart the browser because all these requests are being made to the Jupyter GAI server extension. So when I restart the server, you will see I do have new tasks available to me. Now I have generate image below, generate photorealistic image, and generate cartoon image. And these are all tasks that are provided by the Dolly model engine. And a model engine is basically just a very thin wrapper around a actual machine learning model that basically just handles like prompt synthesis and actually executing the model, which can be very, very different, right? As you might know, running a machine learning model locally versus running it via a REST API are two very, very different things. And the model engine is essentially just a thin layer of abstraction that hides away the details of that. Basically, it's just some way of executing a model, right? And the model engine can expose default tasks here. So when you install them, these tasks automatically get populated into the backend. So these are the 3 default tasks that are provided by the Dolly model engine. So here we can simply just generate an image of a cat. Oh. Oh, it's because, oh, I have to restart because there is a lab extension part, I think. My apologies. Ah, there we go. Yeah, and as you might imagine, I was going to do another example, but it wouldn't really be that interesting. Basically, as you can see, Jupyter GAI is indeed actually modular, and we designed it to be that way from the start. And we believe that this has a lot of application in JupyterLab, especially with regard to development tooling. And we would like everybody to go ahead and vote for it. Yeah, that's it from me. I think any questions people may have, we should probably answer them in the parking lot, since I've already taken up a lot of time.
David, there was a question that came in via Gabriella in the chat, which says, are there particular use cases or user types that you're thinking of that could benefit from the image generation inside JupyterLab?
Yeah, so I think the idea that like JupyterLab is only for data scientists is a fairly narrow view of JupyterLab, right? Like a notebook supports many different multimedia formats, and I think it's entirely plausible that developers working with these different media formats could need some way of, for example, generating images for, like, for example, stock images or for textures. Yeah, and scientific figures and illustrations are also worthwhile, right? So I think one of the most interesting examples of image generation that I've seen is that a lot of game developers and their toolkits, there's actually kind of a racket, apparently, some kind of like stock texture racket that normally people would have to pay a subscription fee to access a lot of stock textures. But nowadays with generative AI, they can generate these textures for free and really focus on diving deep into 3D rendering and all those processes rather than paying a subscription fee to some company. Yeah.
Isabel?
I admittedly have a lot of questions. I don't know if we have time for them. And I will also note, I haven't gotten to read all the proposal stuff in full. So if I ask a question that you think is answered there, like feel free to point me in that direction. I think one of my key questions right now, though, is perhaps with my, with the skill set I have, I'm not sure like how, like, why is this Jupyter specifically? Like in what ways does this link to Jupyter things? Why should it be like a package within the JupyterLab org, I think would be my general question. Because from the outside, as someone who doesn't work with this, I'm not seeing where the connection is between the larger work and why this like should be something Jupyter is maintaining versus something that people could bring into Jupyter.
Yeah, this is a great question, and we do actually have a section here in the original issue. Wait, is this an old draft? I don't see the section that we had proposed.
David, that's in the Compass issue.
Oh, that's in the Compass issue. I'm sorry. Yeah, so again, let me
So just to be clear, in the Team Compass issue, the vote that you're proposing is to create a package in the JupyterLab org, but in the PR, you're creating this package within JupyterLab core. So
the PR is just to show the code that we've written so far.
Okay.
There's no intention of merging it. It's just a place to put the proposal and then provide essentially a diff viewer to see what changes we need.
Correct. Yeah, I just needed a place to show the code. So there are three kind of modules there that people can actually download and play with. They can install it if you want. And I needed a place to put that. So
Mhm.
that's the only reason it's just a placeholder. We don't intend to merge that code.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I don't know if you've answered Isabella's question.
Mhm.
You said there's a section in the issue that talks about this. Could you maybe just
Yeah, let me link it to it again in the Zoom chat. But it's the very first paragraph right there. But essentially, we believe that Jupyter will want to support. We believe that the direction development tooling is taking is that generative AI and especially large language models such as ChatGPT and GPT-3 will become increasingly used by developers. And we understand that right now, some people, especially some pessimists in the room, might laugh at that. But we believe that eventually these capabilities will evolve to a point where they can no longer be ignored. And we believe that providing a default implementation that gives that JupyterLab essentially, we provide an implementation that JupyterLab provides its full backing and support for. We believe this will save a lot of wasted effort. And furthermore, some of these large language models there will be a demand in the user base to use these models to help them develop code. I think that is an absolute guarantee. There will be demand. There will be people. If when ChatGPT releases a REST API for that model, I can guarantee that there will be users asking, how can I use ChatGPT in Jupyter? And I think having an official project within JupyterLab to point people towards and tell them we are going to support this. This is a priority for us. I think that is really important in building trust in the Jupyter community.
Yeah, so ideologically that makes sense. I think something I'm wondering with this that's coming up in the chat is, right, that people will want this integration. I'm not actually sure what this integration means, and that could be on me. I'm not a developer, so I don't know if I'll read the description more. But yeah, that's what I was kind of wondering is like, what are the changes we're making? But yeah, that makes sense though, the demand.
And yeah, and something I do wish to point out is that the Jupyter GAI modules do not need to, there's no plan to install them by default. And right now they are provided by default, but there's absolutely no intention of forcing users to have an open AI account to use JupyterLab like that. That is preposterous, right? So we do want to emphasize that this is we are essentially model agnostic, right? We don't demonstrate any particular preference for whatever flavor of the month model is available. It's just right now the most to be frank, the most capable models for a live demo just happen to be hosted by OpenAI. We don't really, but there's nothing stopping users from using other models, even ones that they are running locally, although that would be much more difficult, just given the fact it's more difficult to run one locally.
Yeah, and I think we should go to Mike. Thank you for answering that. I can also add comments on the issue itself. So thanks.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, it's much better. Thanks.
Much better, much better.
All right, so two questions I wanted to bring up from the chat. One is about the naming. So is generative part, will it stick, or should we go for something more generic? And what I think is trying to do is offer an assistance to lots of tasks that the user might perform. That's maybe something for discussion that you compass. I don't expect an answer now, unless you already have some thoughts.
We're very open to naming suggestions. We do appreciate the fact that Jupyter GAI is a few too many syllables. We've sometimes been calling it Jupyter Guy, but that could be problematic. So Yeah, we are very, very open to naming suggestions. Just FYI.
Okay, and the other question that I think Nick raised is that some of these tasks could be actually performed by a language server in the sense of LSP specification from Microsoft. And currently, the LSP specification does not include tasks like this specifically. There is no designated actions for like add a cell with output, but there are already commands which can be run and defined by the server. So that's a big question. If the community of language server goes into that direction, could it potentially create duplication? And the interface part that would still be useful, whatever happens, but the backend handling of that, this might be a little bit problematic, or at least causing some duplication. So have you looked into the plans and the landscape here?
Absolutely. So we are the user experience and the user stories here are absolutely not set in stone. And in fact, we've actually been planning to migrate away from the dialogue user experience that we just demoed, where a user selects a range of text and then right clicks and then it opens a dialogue. We've actually been thinking about migrating away from that user experience just because it's too many actions. And as for language server integration, I think anything's on the table as long as it can be implemented in a modular way. And what I mean by that is if a user runs pip install GAI module and it just works, like it just does whatever magic it needs to on the language server side. Again, I don't know anything about this. I'm just speaking in hypotheticals. Then there's absolutely no reason it couldn't be used as an implementation, and there's no reason why it wouldn't be the default. But I think there's a lot of research that needs to be conducted before we can make that kind of agreement to add it to the interface.
Jason Grow.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
This looks, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This looks really exciting. I really appreciate and applaud the effort that went into bringing these capabilities into Jupyter. One of the big questions I have anytime somebody proposes opening a new repo is, what's the plan for maintaining this repo? And it kind of goes to Isabella's question of, all right, why should this be a Jupyter package with all the work that comes with having something in the Jupyter repo? So do you have a plan for, do you, a couple of people plan on keeping, developing and maintaining this? Or what's the plan around that?
Yeah, so because we are employed by AWS, we also have certain internal processes that we have that ensure that we are maintaining the projects that we own. So for example, we have an on-call process on our team. And in fact, I am this week's on-call. And we have an assigned engineer dedicating 20 hours a week to fixing any existing bugs and CI issues in all of the repos that we own. So for example, Jupyter Scheduler, Jupyter File ID, right? These are some of the other projects that our team had been working on. And we continue to maintain these today. So I think that I think that in terms of maintenance, we are very qualified to maintain this project.
So maybe paraphrasing my question and answer, the backbone of maintainers that you're proposing is yourself and the few other people working on the team, and you have time dedicated towards helping maintain this, and you're willing and able to continue maintaining this.
Right. So right now, the current backbone of contributors is just us because we were the original authors. But there's absolutely nothing stopping other people from joining in on this.
Yep. Can you add that to your Team Compass issue? What the plan is initially for maintenance? That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. We can do that.
Can anyone on the call think of an official Jupyter package that invokes an external service over the internet and does stuff? Cool, JupyterLab GitHub, that's a great example. I wanted to know if we have prior art for an official package that we publish that interfaces with a commercial product. So that's a really great example. Any others? Yeah, the bunch of failed Google ones are actually kind of what I'm imagining in the back of my mind. Services get turned off sometimes, and us being the people who look like we published it when a backend goes offline means we'll have to field at least the initial displeasure. But you're talking about multiple backends here, so perhaps it's a bit resilient to that. But I don't know. Have you been thought to this?
So something I just want to point out, like I think David touched on that point, that the model engines, the actual calls to these backends is something that will be user specific. We don't plan to, I think, correct me, David, it's wrong. We don't plan to have default model engines installed unless the user wants to, right? And they can choose to, sorry, go ahead.
So I think the key picture here is that GAI modules are entirely opt-in. A user has to explicitly type the package name, pip install it, and then only then and only then is that GAI module available. Right now we had GPT-3 as a model engine just included by default, just purely for a technical demo purpose. And we actually do plan on completely moving that out and putting it in a separate GAI module. That's always been the roadmap. And
we also made it so that, sorry, David, we also made it so that the GAI models are only going to be used when you choose to send data to them. They're not like listening and auto completing what you said by, say, completing David's sentence.
And I think that there's a lot of concern, a lot of rightful concern that JupyterLab may, or more specifically us, I suppose, we could be demonstrating preference towards certain, because, you know, right now generative AI is a very hot topic in enterprise applications, and there's a lot of startups revolving around this. I think there's some concern that we might demonstrate favoritism, so to speak, to one company or another. And I think this is another reason why it's really valuable to have it under JupyterLab. I think the Jupyter governance model really does apply here, where, you know, if it has the Jupyter name on it, I think that people like a governance model ensures that each default implementation that we do provide, and here default implementation doesn't mean it's installed by default, it just means it's supported by default. And anyways, for these default implementations, I think it's important that a Jupyter governance model is applied here, and that no company or organization is given preference over another. Yeah.
If this was a standalone open source package, like I don't know if you saw in the chat, like Tony suggested in Jupyter Contrib or something like that, do you think that would harm the effort you're undertaking here? So some things incubate and then are brought in, some things are brought in pretty soon after publication. Like basically, I guess I'm wondering if you considered that route.
We have, and for the reasons that we've already discussed, we do believe that it's more applicable to have this immediately under the JupyterLab org. Now, we do wish people to vote on this, and obviously everybody have their opinion voiced, but we do think that this is significant enough to warrant it belonging under the JupyterLab org.
Mike, sorry, I didn't mean
So
to-
following on that, it seems that it includes a cookie cutter in the proposal. So that's getting a pretty big monorepo. And
Right.
consider
And
whether you want that to be a single repository or multiple repositories. And then maybe the approach that we've taken with JupyterLab LSP of having an organization which is separate from, or maybe a hybrid model where the frontend package would sit in the JupyterLab organization for like to promote it more widely so that it's easily discoverable, but the rest of the implementation specific packages would be in a separate organization.
yeah, we had thought of that. The difficulty there is that in the multi-repo setup, as you might know, it's more difficult to coordinate releases that involve breaking changes that of the actual API surface. So for example, if we do make a breaking API change, we would want to have all of the default model engines to be updated in some way to support that latest version of Jupyter GAI. And it's much more difficult to coordinate all of those changes across separate repos than it is to make a single pull request on a mono repo. Granted, of course, as you pointed out, a mono repo brings its own difficulties, and we are fully aware of that. But we do think that this is a good experiment for us to take here. I think there's a lot of ambiguity as to how a mono repo is set up today in Jupyter, especially using Jupyter Releaser and all of the other default CI workflows we use. We think there's a lot of ambiguity as to how that would be carried over to a mono repo repository. But we do think that the benefits strongly outweigh the downsides here. And the way we see it is it's very possible for us to begin shipping more model engines. And as that number grows, it becomes increasingly painful to have each and every one be a separate Git repository. Not to mention that we might have to if we were to provide them official support and actually have them under a Jupyter GitHub org, we would have to call a vote every single time to add a new default model engine, when in reality, implementing a new model engine is actually very simple, especially with that cookie cutter. It only took me like 15 minutes to implement the Dolly model engine. So the cookie cutter really enables developers to create new model engines really fast. And that's part of the reason why we think these default ones belong in a mono repo.
Tony.
I got to start off and say I'm really excited about where this goes. Right now, the eagerness and hype around it makes me cautious, because when I think about the notebook, the goal is insight, right? Insight into your compute, and how the tools that we have that we use around it should facilitate that. So we've been talking about a very privileged group of people here, which are developers, right? Like people who are literate in code and understanding of this. So something designed in a short period of time, because it's easy and because it's fast, makes me really wary about the design consequences that we're overlooking. So what caveats does this come with? How do we protect new users, right? Because like this could easily be a gateway drug into Jupyter. I can totally see a class educating somebody about how generative AI incorporates into their classroom, incorporates into their homework eventually. While we're getting there, what kinds of concerns would you, what kind of things would you be concerned about, honestly, to a Luddite like me? Near term, how can we ease the blow of actually probably what is an order of magnitude larger population of than developers are people who are casually using Jupyter. So how do we protect people from losing insight?
Right. There are a lot of social and ethical questions that come with integrating generative AI by default. I absolutely agree with that. And our perspective is that eventually generative AI will be as common as copy and paste and spell check. I mean, if you really think about it, spell check is kind of an artificial intelligence in a way that people grew accustomed to having. And we see that these new code generation and explanation capabilities and these large language models are essentially an extension of that. And we see it as almost inevitable. And our perspective is that we shouldn't try to fight against it, but rather work with it, right? And I do agree that there are these concerns, right, that you rightfully possess. And that's also one of the reasons why we believe that this deserves to be an official Jupyter sanctioned project with that is governed by the existing Jupyter governance model. As for the social concerns, I do want to, like, I know I'm speaking a bit vaguely here, so I do want to give a specific response to your question. And I think there is also social benefit to integrating these generative AI models. It's not just, I know there are some concerns over like vague harm, but I can list a specific benefit here. And that is that it really democratizes the process of software development. If you have these tools, if we have these tools that help explain code in a human interpretable way, humans will be better at writing code. The barrier to entry is lowered and more people can enter software development without feeling gatekept or pushed aside. And we think that there is demonstrable social good here that is being provided. We would not add a new project just because it's very hyped up right now. In fact, some of the hype is already kind of dying. You don't really see like that many people talk about ChatGPT anymore. Our goal was never the hype or the fame or anything. We genuinely believe that this is a tool for software development and it makes people more productive. In short, it's like a force multiplier. It's like a lever. We think that it will make people better and it will lower barriers to entry and bring other social benefits as well.
Okay, I think there's a lot more we can talk about. So
yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah, I propose we move on. I think so. There's a decision you need to make, though. Do you want to call a vote right away, or would you prefer to wait and have a bit more conversation around it? Because, and you don't have to answer me right now, just think about that, because on the issue, you can call a vote or you can leave it to talk next week, or maybe perhaps even once we stop recording, there might be more conversation to be had before the performance call. For the time being, though, let's move on because we do have 2 more agenda items. And thank you for both the demo and the Q&A. That was really helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason Grau, you're up.
Yeah, just briefly, so the Jupyter Security Council has been approached by an organization that's interested in funding a bug bounty for Jupyter software. We're not sure if it's a good fit actually for Jupyter, so we're still working through some of the details, but the deadlines are also approaching. So I just wanted to, one, give a heads up that we might, that there might be this opportunity to do a bug bounty program that's funded by an outside entity for the benefit of the open source program. It would involve some work from, if JupyterLab, the JupyterLab subproject, was enrolled as part of this bug bounty, it would involve some work from people in JupyterLab to identify which specific packages in JupyterLab, maybe JupyterLab's, the JupyterLab main package, but there may be other packages as well in the JupyterLab org that you want security researchers to look at. And it would also involve JupyterLab people volunteering to engage with vetted bug reports and confirming the severity and working on fixes and things like that. So we don't know for sure if this program can accommodate the Jupyter packages, but if it can, I just wanted a quick understanding. Are there people interested in engaging with a 6 to 8 week security bug bounty program with security researchers for JupyterLab packages? Just a quick like raise your hand in Zoom if you think that's interesting and you would be interested in participating in some way, either helping identify packages that you want people to look at, or working with bug reports that have been vetted to some level already, and see if those were okay. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Okay, great. That's enough interest that that we're happy to continue pursuing the conversation and seeing if we can do something about this. So I will. So if it ends up that we end up doing a bug bounty program, I'll post to the JupyterLab Council as an sort of for an official answer from the JupyterLab subproject, but I'll also mention it in these meetings.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, and please feel free to just answer in the chat if not the chat, the minutes if you wish. Does anyone know, is there a reasonable way to create a lab icon instance when you have the URL of an SVG and not the SVG as a base 64 encoded string? Because in the API, all I'm finding is SVGs imported via TypeScript and Webpack, but I want to take a kernel spec and use its icon to generate a lab icon. And everywhere that we're using the kernel spec resources logos, people are actually creating image tags or React image tags or something like that. They're not using lab icon. So if anyone knows, please just add a note in there, but we can move on from it. The other is, I opened a PR last year and we had a bunch of conversation. Yeah, I could fetch the content. I just don't want to do that. That is inelegant, but yes. And the PR was to create a way to swap out the service manager. And there were a few things about it that warranted further discussion. One was a security conversation that I still think is resolvable as just, do we open up new vectors? Is this a problem or not? But the other was just a general, like, do we even want this? I'm happy to close my PR if we think that having a special type of Jupyter front-end plugin that specifically allows you to replace a service manager is not a good pattern and not something we should pursue. But because it's, because this PR, I put it on the 4.0 milestone, I just want to get rid of it if we don't want this feature. And I wanted to know if anyone had any thoughts on it. I think Nick added something late in the year, last year, about how maybe actually what we want is some way to swap out things in the existing service manager instead of writing a plugin. There are other approaches here. So I don't know, any thoughts? Let me find the PR to link as well.
Look, and I can summarize quickly. One, I have overloaded Service Manager. We've overloaded Service Manager like 2 or 3 times and in various settings, and it was only for behaviors of the sub pieces, like where do I get kernel specs, who can turn on kernels, and the stuff that's already parameterized, like fetch and WebSocket. So I think it's good to be able to rely on it being there. I think it's bad that you can get multiple copies of Service Manager from outside. That creates problems, because if some extension creates its own service manager that's not configured with the upstream, if it has been customized, it doesn't go all the way down. But more classes of plugins are not going to help. Yeah. I don't know. And then specifically in the case of JupyterLite, it wouldn't help us. We still need a custom application. We can't use the JupyterLab application. So that's about all.
Okay. So, I mean, the premise of an alternative kind of plugin is that app.service manager will always be there for any plugin. No plugin code would have to be modified. But realistically, if even an application that's a literal one-to-one clone of JupyterLab won't benefit from this, I can't think of a better use case than that. So if this doesn't fix your problem, it probably doesn't fix anyone's problem. So I'm happy to close the PR unless someone actually thinks, you know, there's some low-hanging fruit here that I'm now missing. And it's mine, so I won't be offended if you say close it. I think I'm now convinced that maybe I should close it. Okay.
Yeah. But in the meantime, if we reopen something about making kernel spec discovery pluggable and making kernel instantiation pluggable, that would actually help JupyterLite a lot.
I mean, that sounds like what we need is REST endpoints, and then the alternative version of the kernel manager just supports those same endpoints because it'll all be behind promises. And you can do whatever you want when it's client side, but when it's server side, presumably that's something we should support on the Jupyter server REST API to say, hey, I want to programmatically generate a kernel spec anyway. Here it is, something like that. But I don't think that's actually I don't know if that falls within JupyterLab slice of the stack. I think it's a bit lower.
Well, specifically in the case of JupyterLab, what the hell's a server, right?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is we define that in the REST API. We build the JupyterLab services front end that has those functions, and then the implementation of a service manager for any application might not talk to any backend, right?
Yeah. I mean, from the front end perspective, it looks just like what we have for registering code mirror modes, which I haven't even looked at how that's done before now. But this is a place that you could get code mirror modes. That's not the dist directory of code mirror on disk with node modules, and just some way to distinguish between them, like same exact pattern.
Okay.
And not conflate kernel spec providing and kernel provisioning too closely.
Okay. This sounds like a longer conversation than we have time for. So let's move to Mike's point.
I'm happy to discuss this point after we finish the recording, if we have short time.
Okay. I mean, have we talked about a 3.7? Can we? Okay. Anyway, you know what? I think this is probably a good spot to stop recording because I feel like there's, in this particular call, things people will want to say off the record. So brace yourselves.